Okay, so I made it to my seat without falling, so my job here is done, right? I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with these amazing panelists. We have an amazing discussion ahead of us today, and I'm really excited to be here because I have a massive passion for soccer, and Road to 2026 will be instrumental for not only our country, but how football accelerates here. And I'm so excited about that for both men and women. All right, Stephen, since you're already prepped in your presentation, I'm going to ask you the first question. And I'd like to say, if I ask someone directly a question, if you guys have your own perspective from your own experience that you'd like to follow up with, I encourage a nice conversation. Don't worry, I'm not scary. Okay, can you speak to the importance of having a successful men's team at the 2026 World Cup, and what will that mean to sport in Canada?
Oh, I think it could be massive. And I take a step back, and I don't think it's just about 2026. If you listen to our men's national team head coach, John Hartman, it's just as much about 2022. Mm-hmm. He is positioning himself to qualify for 2022 as a lead-up. I think we've changed the culture. It's not about just participating, it's about winning. It's about achieving at the highest level. But to be on the world stage there would be absolutely massive for our country. We've seen it on the women's side. We've seen how engaged the soccer community got around our women in the competitions over the last 10 years, particularly in 2015, from coast to coast. So I think that we're already growing that soccer culture. The people in this room obviously see that. They live it. They've embraced it. But I think it could be so much more, and I think that's the legacy piece that we can look at, that over the course of time, that it's going to grow to the point where our men are on the world stage at the same level as our women.
You mentioned John Hartman. He did such a successful job with the women's program. What's his vision now with the men's team?
Same thing. John is one of the most organized coaches that I've ever had the experience of being around. Very sophisticated, very comprehensive. John has built the foundation. He's built a culture within the men's program that we haven't seen before. And no disrespect to any coaches that preceded him, but what I see with John and around the team is so much different. It's very encouraging. You have to kind of be inside the room a little bit to see the extent of the change and what he's brought to the program. So again, I'm really excited about what he's brought, and it's also exciting that we've got so many amazing players that have come through in recent years.
So Alphonso Davies is killing it at Bayern Munich. Kyle Lair and Jonathan David just won Canadian Player of the Year. There's some important players now in the group who are essentially paving the way. How important is it to have someone like Alphonso Davies in the Bundesliga, playing with some of the best players in the world, experiencing soccer on an international level, and taking that experience and bringing it back to the Canadian national team ahead of the World Cup?
I think it's really important. We've had a lot of players that have played at the highest levels before. But Alphonso, with the youth that we've got in the team now, I think that brings a different dynamic to that. So as I said, it's really exciting. We've got guys like Alphonso and Jonathan that can bring that experience back. But we also got a lot of other amazing young players playing either in the MLS, playing in other clubs in Europe, playing in the CPL. So Bill can speak to that, to some of the players that we've got on Toronto FC and David and some of our teams in the CPL. So there's a lot of really good young players that are coming up that are going to form the foundation for 2022 and 2026.
Bill, we were just talking about this. Liam Fraser, Richie Larea, Jonathan Osorio. What does something like this mean to these guys who play on an MLS team, obviously here in Canada?
Yeah, I think the sky is the limit for Canadian soccer. The talent level, especially at the youth, is incredible. A little-known game happened not long ago. Our U15 Canadian national team beat Mexico. It was the first time in 10 years a Canadian team beat a Mexican team, national team. And it just shows you the level of play that some of these young kids, we had 8 players on that team. And we had tested that team against as good a competition as they could get. We played in the United States Development Academy League against fellow MLS teams, and we won the national championship. Our U15 team, which is made up of all Canadian players. And so we were very proud that they could actually come to the national team, represent Canada, and beat Mexico. And then I think it's just going to be the tip of the iceberg. And when you look at 2022 and 2026, it's a number of young players, I think, that are going to be, obvious Alfonso and Jonathan are going to be a big part of that. But there's guys that maybe aren't even on your radar screen now. A young player, Jaden Nelson, who I just told you, I think he's going to be the next Alfonso Davies. We have a kid, Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy, who was the National Player of the Year last year in the USSDA, and he is going to be a phenom. He's another one. He's 15 years old. And then there's Noble Okello, who's a 2000, and Julian Dunn, and so on. Jordan Perutz is another name. And, Vancouver has them, Montreal has them. There's clubs in the CPL that have these kids. And so I think the future is really high for Canadian soccer.
Do you find as though, within TFC or the developmental teams that having, the 2026 World Cup, part of it being Canada, is inspiring but yet competitive? It challenges them to be better every single day, which of course athletes need to have.
Yeah, and I love what John Hartman has done with the team. To Steve's point, he has set the bar much higher than I think it's ever been held here in Canada, and I think it started with Victor, who spoke last night. There's no reason why Canada shouldn't be amongst the best teams in CONCACAF, and John has certainly brought that. The inspiration, and I was fortunate enough in 1994, I lived in the U.S. when they had the World Cup, and it changed my life. And how inspiring it was to me and a generation of players. I was still a player at that time, playing in the USL before MLS. And I think here in Canada, being part of the 2026 World Cup can do the same exact thing for a whole new generation of players and athletes. And I'm really excited because I think our entire sport can jump to another level. And it happened in the U.S. back in 1994. A lot of the players that played in 1994 in the U.S. national team are coaches now. Tab Ramos just became the coach of Houston in our league. He was a big player in that. Brad Friedel wound up going on to play in the Premier League for many years. And so it can launch careers. And so I just think that these next 5 years, we have to continue doing what we're doing, work together, and really set that as the goal to take everything to another level. And I think Canada should be right there with Mexico and the U.S. in terms of CONCACAF. And the one thing, and it's funny, Brendan Shanahan said this to me when we were talking about our sports, and he said when a Canadian hockey team loses to the U.S. or even a team from Europe, they are pissed off. And we found this even in our own academy. When our teams would lose or the Canadian youth teams would lose, we played well against Mexico. Weren't pissed. And it's a hockey mentality that Canada is the best. And I think John is changing that, and I think some of the youth national team coaches here in Canada are changing that it's no longer acceptable just to play a good game. It's now how do we win these competitions and how do we win CONCACAF, and we've tried to instill that in Toronto FC at all our levels. And I think the mentality of Canada soccer, and this is someone who's been here now 5 years, seeing it maybe from a different angle, has changed just in my time here. And I'm really proud to be part of it.
Yeah. David, Eva, maybe you guys can give us your perspective from the CPL.
Yeah, from the CPL perspective, I mean, we look at it as, and much as what Bill has said, we have done a great job with youth up until the point where they reach, 15 years of age. And there's a big drop-off. There's been big drop-off in Canada for years now. we believe that we have to widen the funnel, and we have to create more opportunities. We need to be tenfold on opportunities. There's great talent in Canada playing the game of football. Like, there's no doubt about it. We just have not given them the opportunity to actually succeed and be at home and succeed. It's very difficult to have a youngster go overseas early and very early. It's tough to leave home. So creating opportunities here is big for us. I look at what the 2026 World Cup's going to do. I mean, it is going to change this country forever. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, people really don't understand what it's going to be like to have multiple Super Bowls in a month in this country. Not only from a fan base perspective and a supporter base, but what it does to the youth. All they look for is they want that kind of North Star. Point me to something that I can aspire to do and be. One thing about Canadians, we are passionate sports people. And when we get behind things, we do really well at it. We all know that. That's why we're here. But so I look at it and say, I'll take our 35 million-ish people and put them against anybody in the world as long as we get focused on it and everybody gets behind it, because it makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you talk about the passion for sport. There's statistics that show that of all of the nations in the world, all the countries in the world, I think Canada ranks in the top 5 for traveling to World Cups as spectators. So we're out there, wanting to engage and wanting to consume the game in that way, where you're spending a lot of money to go abroad. You imagine what it'll be like in our own country, where they're getting to see their hometown heroes in our host candidate cities.
A tremendous amount of pride in the country. That's the other thing. So what ends up happening is Canadians will all step forward and they'll open their doors and say, this is who we are. And I'm telling you, around the globe, and Stephen knows this, Bill knows it, he sees it as well. We are thought of as such a high level around the world. When we went to Spain and we met the people from Atletico Madrid, right? It was unbelievable what their vision of Canada and how they thought of Canada and what a high perch they put us on. This is unique it's very unique in the world to see that.
So funny you say that. Little story, I went away on vacation this Christmas break to Germany and Austria and Hungary, and my 17-year-old son said, Dad, we got to be Canadian, they like us better. It's a true story. And it's
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And it's how Canadians are viewed around the world. David is right. There's great people in this country, and for someone who moved here, for my boy to say, hey, let's be Canadian, it's kind of a proud moment. But it's a funny moment, but it is how, the ugly American, right, is a real thing. And I think Canadians, the way we're viewed around the world, and I like to say I'm an adopted son, it's something that's awesome. I can't tell you, it resonates, right? That is a true, accurate statement.
That's interesting, because I don't know if I made mention of this in my opening remarks, but when we were doing the campaign, on our international campaign, it was really, really clear that we were just so much better with Canada being involved with that.
Yeah,
if the U.S. had gone out, and I can't say this unequivocally, if the U.S. had bid on their own, I'm not sure that they would have won the bid.
Yeah.
But the fact that we brought 3 federations together that had very different cultures, but a lot of commonality, I think it was so compelling.
I think they needed Canada soccer.
Yeah.
Well,
At the end of the day.
it's interesting because, football is a giant, I say this all the time, it's a giant fraternity, right? I mean, and when I talk to people around the globe, everybody wants to help. You think about competition on the pitch, it's to the death, right? Honestly, that's the way we look at it. But when it comes to actually sitting in a boardroom, talking to people, it's what can we do to help? It's amazing. And the fact that there's so many people around the globe rooting for us. They know that we bring a different level of competition to things when we do really well. They see what we do in hockey. They see other sports. They see what our women's team has done, our national women's team, right? They are rooting for us, and I think it's fantastic.
2026 is obviously a very unique World Cup. Are there any plans and motions to make it a valuable fan experience for Canadians here in the country and people who are coming from outside here?
In terms of the fan experience?
Yeah, are there to make it it's a very different type of World Cup, right? There's Mexico, there's US, there's Canada. We want to make it memorable for our fans. From a CPL perspective, from Toronto FC, from a nationwide, are there any plans and motions to, solidify our stance in this, that, we are a contender in the World Cup? And of course, I go to TFC, I'm biased. Going to Toronto TFC games are my favorite games to go to, beyond Raptors, Leafs, and whatever else I may go to, because the atmosphere is amazing. And it's hard to create that atmosphere sometimes, and it's not just because I'm a soccer junkie. Of course, I like watching the guys on the pitch, but there's something else to be said about TFC games. So I'm just wondering if you guys have any plans and motions where, fans who may not necessarily be soccer fans can come and enjoy an experience.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've proved that before as well in past competitions. But that was one of the issues that we raised, is that how can we enhance the fan experience when we were going around the countries and saying, because we don't have any infrastructure issues. Well, we have some, but not to the extent where we've got to build new facilities all over the country or countries. So we can focus in these different areas. And it was using innovation. The e-sport concept now is absolutely massive. So, engaging fans in a different way. So trying to get those people in that aren't always out in the stadium. Maybe they're not players necessarily. So just broadening the ability to enjoy the game. But back to what we've done in the past, I don't think there's any question about the fan experience that we had for the Women's World Cup in 2015. That competition, and anybody else in the world can say, like, France was great and Germany was great, but I still believe that our competition was the best Women's World Cup in the history of Women's World Cup. And I think we'll do the same thing on the men's side.
I think if you want to enhance the fan experience, win, baby, win. That's what it boils down to. You don't have to win the World Cup. You have to be able to compete, and compete hard. And John's doing a great job with that. You see a different Canadian men's national team today than I've seen in years and years, honestly, Stephen, because of his attitude and how he works with those players. Those players, when they beat the U.S. at the BMO Field, I'm telling you, they would literally die for each other that night. You could see it on the pitch. That's the kind of competition that we have to deliver. And if we do that, Canadians will come out in droves. That enhances the fan experience.
So was that a key shift in coaching that took the Canadian men's team to the next level? Because like we were saying, they have a talented group. We've always said that. So what does it take for our Canadian men's team to get to that next level, to compete, to win?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. It's changing the culture. It's changing the locker room. It's building that foundation. It's engaging the players in a different way. There's a lot of really good coaches out there. Some of them are great sideline coaches. Some of them are great tactical technicians. But John brings a different different personality to the team. And not all professional footballers are gonna kind of embrace that, but our group definitely has. I mean, you could see it. You saw it on the field. How they went out and prepared themselves for that match against the United States, and just the success that they've had. I mean, I look at it over John's tenure. This looks like we're doing a John Hartman session here, but there's only been probably 90 minutes where you could say we haven't played up to that level. There was 45 minutes against Haiti. And then there was probably 45 minutes against the U.S. in the second match that we played them. Other than that, we have been on the ascendancy for that entire period of time. So that's why, again, going back to, we're not just looking at 2026. 2022 is a reality. I think that we have the talent there. We've got the coach. We've got the staff. We've got the structure in place. So definitely exciting times.
Carolyn, if I may speak a little bit about the opportunity of 2026, and it ties to the fan piece for me. And I think it ties to many of the people that are out here today listening to this conversation and you see it with this panel up here. I think the opportunity that 2026 is bringing for the country at this point in time, which is different from the 2015 Women's World Cup, is it's bringing the entire ecosystem of Canadian soccer together and forcing us to collaborate, to think about how we are doing our business, to think about how we can leverage each other's point of view and mission, both for the players, so the young players coming up through the system and some of those that there's been a gap, as David said, sort of 15, 16, what are we doing for them to address that gap and create competition? Off the field in terms of the partnership side and the business side and, working with Canada Soccer to bring more of corporate Canada around the sport in this runway to 2026. For me, having come from, I've spent my whole life in soccer, but working in other sports in this country, I feel this is the first time that an entire ecosystem, from the grassroots, the clubs, the provinces, national federation, professional sports teams, professional leagues, are all now conversing together about how we do this right in the next 6-7 years, conversing amongst ourselves to make sure that our mission and our vision and our plan is the right plan for the community, so that post-2026, this country has been changed forever, and this sport.
I just met you today, but I'm all of a sudden a big fan of yours. Really, she's remarkable, and you played soccer growing up too, high level. Can you talk a little bit about Christine Sinclair, set a record, all-time leading goal scorer for both men and women internationally? It's unbelievable. How important is it to have someone like Christine Sinclair as well, paving the way? She's inspiring for, both genders.
Absolutely. I was actually doing color commentary in the moment that she scored that goal, and I didn't realize at the time. I left the studio saying, wait a minute, I just did color commentary in the moment that Christine Sinclair scored this goal and hit this milestone for the country. It was a humbling experience to be part of it, and she's such a humble person. And watching her in that moment on the field, because she doesn't express so much emotion too often. I've seen it a few times in her career, but the emotion on her face wasn't relief. It was just like, it was that pride, it was she knew she had hit it. It was maybe a bit of a relief. But what that's done for the sport, for the country, what she has done all along the way, it's tremendous. She's now in the BC Hall of Fame. Some people are saying, hey, Christine for Prime Minister, right?
I
never know what could happen.
Why not?
She might not run for Conservative, David, but I think what that did, the moment did, I think we were all waiting for it. We knew she was going to hit it. There's so many people in the country that have been following her career and the women's program for so long. We remark about this in the office often, which is when you go to women's national team matches, you see grown men wearing Christine Sinclair jerseys. This is something you don't see in other parts of the world. This is how impactful and how important she is to the game in this country.
You talk about the 2026 World Cup changing everything in the country. Can we talk a little bit about the fact that now young boys and girls are going to want to start playing soccer more, and how important it is to develop them, to make sure not only are they developing their skills, but they're in a safe environment, they're having fun. That's one of the most important parts of anyone's job. We want to go to work and we want to have fun, because if we don't, we won't do it for a long time. So how important is it to also develop the younger players? Is there anyone in the audience, any young boys or girls who are playing soccer right now? No. Okay, you guys are all probably coaches. Well, it's super important. Someone, I played soccer growing up. Coach Gary's there. I'm sure Coach Rosenfeld's somewhere in the crowd. These guys were instrumental in my progression, my career, and I guess that's my question: is what are we doing, for the newest wave, the youngest generation coming in, that we have that opportunity now with 2022 and 2026? For anyone who wants to answer that. Sorry, I go on a tangent. I love soccer.
Ask all the people out here. They're the ones that are probably at the forefront of coaching education and dealing with the development of those young kids. I think that we have come so far in our country in terms of the professionalization of our youth soccer. Just the coaching licensing, club licensing that's been implemented. Just recently, our Safe Sport roster, and I think there's a session on that later today or tomorrow. But the whole landscape in Canada and Canada soccer has changed. It's changed from when I played and Bill played and David played. maybe a little less so when you and Eva played because you're much younger than we are. But yeah, I mean, our coaches were dads, and some of them weren't even footballers. My dad coached, and he was a rugby player, so you can imagine what kind of a team we had. So I think that this type of summit is indicative of what we are doing and can do and are doing throughout the country, where we're sharing ideas, we're sharing best practices, we're enhancing coaching education at every different level. So it's happening out there. We've created greater opportunities to put players into professional environments. Bill and TFC have done an amazing job, as have the Whitecaps and the Montreal Impact, but now we have 8 teams in the CPL that are able to do the same thing, as David says, widening the funnel. So we've got more and more players that can come in there and start pushing those other athletes that are in programs already. So it's happening, and it's going to continue to happen over the course of time.
It's back to, it's one word, it's opportunity. When you create opportunity, and you have great people developing young players when they are young, and giving them the opportunity to play and play against good competition, and then giving them something to strive for. It's when they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, things change. You get to a certain age and life takes over, right? Exactly. And so you can fall away from the sport very easily. So many young people that I played with when I was younger. I mean, Sasho Sarovsky's probably a very interesting story, right? I always say, I think he's the only person that I've ever met that actually said no to Alex Ferguson when Alex was at Aberdeen. Like, he basically said, no, I'm going to go back and take the scholarship in the United States. And he coaches at Maryland now. He's probably one of the best coaches in the United States. But that's a talent that should be here, right? So, and we played together for 10 years when we were younger, right? And you think about that type of thing, there needs to be more of that. And it's about opportunity here at home. And so we're all trying our best. We're all just cogs in the machine, but the machine's got to work really well.
Yeah, one of the things that's never lost on me, though, is 99.5% of the players probably will never play professional, but that's okay. And I think part of it, and this is what's great about Ontario soccer, is soccer is a fun sport. It's a great sport. Boys, girls, men, women. It's a sport you can play in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s and 50s, right?
Still
I
do.
mean, and it's okay not to reach the highest level. But I think what's great about our sport is when you play it, you realize how hard it is, how difficult it is. So when you go out on the field and you see a Sebastian Javenko or Jonathan Osorio or Tristan Borges, whoever, you appreciate that. And I try to never get lost on me, especially when I talk to Johnny and what you're doing at Ontario Soccer, is that so many of the kids that we sponsor and all the programs that are out there, a lot of those kids won't reach professional. And I think it's great we have more opportunity now, but that's okay, because different individuals have different reasons for why they play our sport. And I really try to never lose that, is that how do we continue to make it fun? How do we continue to make it competitive? How do we continue to keep people engaged? And so it's really important, I think, what we're all doing here at the grassroots level. It's not just we're just the kind of tip, the base and the foundation of Canada soccer is actually at the grassroots level.
I think one of the things we need to work on is we need to find a way to be, the sport is inclusive, it truly is, but to find a way to really identify everyone that plays in this country. Because the reality is, many people play the game in this country but aren't necessarily registered. Right? We don't know who they are. And to make sure that we draw a circle around the entire soccer or football system is very important to us. I think we have to work on that, because there's so many, if you think about it, I worked for a little coffee company for years, right? And when I left there, we had 200,000 kids playing Timbits hockey. We had 300,000 kids playing Timbits soccer. And that's 5 and 6 year olds. It carries forward, right? But we need to find a way to make sure that we're talking to everybody, and everybody's part of the conversation and part of the plan as we move forward, right? We all have to work together on this. Yeah. It's very, very important for it.
And I totally agree. And Bill, you mentioned, something that's near and dear to my heart. I sat right up because not a lot of players make it professionally. A quick brief about my background. I thought I was going to play soccer for the rest of my life. I was playing collegiately at West Virginia University. I was in the U17 Canadian national program, went to a World Cup, was supposed to go into the camps for the Rio Olympic Games. Then it eventually ended up having 3 knee surgeries. Third one, the surgeons were like, you're done. You cannot play competitive sports again. And that was, I believe, the 3rd year of my collegiate career. And all of a sudden, I had this complex, like, what do I do with my life? All I've done for 12 years is train hours upon hours. And when I wasn't on the field, I was watching Serie A. I was watching international soccer. And now I'm at a point where I can't even watch because my sport was taken away from me. I think for all the coaches out there, it's so important to understand that even the best player on your team might not make it to that professional level. And it's so important to help them understand that they are much more beyond their sport. They have much more capacity in them than just the ball at their feet. And we need to push our everyone, grassroots programs, all the young players, all the players who are on professional teams today. It doesn't just apply to younger generations. It applies to people my age that there's so much we can do for soccer, even if we're not playing. And that's something I learned the hard way. Eva and I were talking about it backstage. I'd love to get your opinion on this too. It's so instrumental to know that there's much more we can do around the sport, even if we can't play, and even if it was taken away from a player that's playing on your team or you yourself. There's so much opportunity, and that's why I'm so excited to be sitting here with these guys. I was saying to Steve and I just even get teary-eyed because soccer was taken away from me, but even the fact that I get to be here with old coaches, with this amazing panel, to have my parents who drove me to millions of practices here in the front row is so awesome. And that comes full circle for me. I'm sorry for talking so much. They probably won't invite me back next year. So, Eva, if you can talk about, your experience too, because I think that these are such valuable lessons.
I think, for me, when I think about sort of the youth and that fun experience, and I think about my own experience in the sport, I happen to have some skill in the sport, but I've reflected even now, like the last few years, what soccer meant to me for my life. I've come back now and I'm working in a sport that I've loved my whole life. What did it mean for me growing up, and what did it mean for me in terms of my own development as a person? It was all about my ability to really express who I was. So yes, I could kick a ball, and coaches would say, you have this talent and you're this talent, and you need to go here, you need to do this, all of those things. Having that support was fantastic, but the greater support that I remember from some of my coaches were the ones that just let me be who I was. So if I was on a path to go to the States and play Division I soccer, and I believed that that was the best path for me for where I wanted to go further down the road, then those coaches that supported me down that path are the ones that I remember. When I came back to Western, my coach at the time, his greatest asset as a coach was just bringing a culture amongst the team, like a cheerleader, really. It wasn't about the technical grind for us and, taking it up a notch. It was really just sort of creating that great culture for us. And, my last year when I was finishing up and graduating again, it was just, he let me express myself, even with my teammates. So as the captain, he let me sort of be that leader that I am, express myself, bring my team with me, take accountability where I needed to. That is what caused me to move on and want to work in sport, because that was not my plan. I was going to work for the FBI. David, I don't think you knew that, but that was actually where I was headed. But what brought me back to sport was I couldn't imagine my life without sport in it and without sport people in it. And growing up along the way, I played soccer with boys until I was 14 years old. So for me, there was no difference. And we talk about the difference constantly. There was no difference. I didn't learn and really start to think and focus on the big difference between male sport and female sport until I started working in sport. That's when it's just in your face all the time, and you're reconciling this. But someone who's playing in sport or an athlete, they don't think about governance. You know, they don't think about conflict. They're doing this because this is their outlet, this is their expression of who they are, and it has the potential to springboard them into a fantastic career or to take them in a really dark place. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, and what I've tried to give back to soccer and other sports, and in particular teenagers, is, you know, you are more than just that sport, it's the expression, and how can we just help people get to the best place that they can be in their future? That's the most important thing to me.
You know, it's crazy. That's amazing.
Well said.
I was just sitting here listening to you. I can name every coach I ever played for, dating back till 6 years old. I just went through and I can name my first Jim Taylor, Mr. LaRosa, Mr. Lyons, literally down the line. My dad was in there. Like, I can remember, and that's the effect, right? So everyone in this room, the effect you have on people, they'll remember you 20, 30, for me, 50 years later, I can remember who my first soccer coach is. I can't remember my first grade teacher. I can remember my first soccer coach, though. And that's really amazing. And you know, sometimes it's good to sit back and reflect on that, to see the influence you have on people's lives, and especially these young kids. And in my capacity running a TFC, the impact we can have on a community that enjoys the game and loves the game, as coaches, the impact you can have on kids and the youth coming up, which 20, 30, 40 years from now, you have someone saying, hey, I learned this from Mr. Jones, and this is how I'm going to apply soccer. And so it's interesting you say that, because I can name every single coach I've ever played for.
As a parent, I've got 5 of them, so 5 kids. But you know, you recognize as you get a little older, you start to reflect, and you realize, you know, that there's only so much you can teach your kids as a parent. Eventually, they look for other adult figures to be able to say, you know, for mentorship. And sport coaches are the most influential people that you could have, other than teachers and sport coaches, because they look for mentorship and to learn from others outside of their own family. Because it's, you know, okay, I expect my mom and dad to say this, but it's very, very important. So how you impact these kids, it sets them up for the rest of their lives, whether they actually fulfill their dream in sport or not, but they become good people, right? And that's important.
I feel like we could all answer this question, so whoever starts first, you know, I think it'd be a good conversation. You know, Bill, we were talking about how some players are put in positions in sport. You sink or swim. You're a starter, you're a bench player. You're injured, you're not, whatever it may be. Those skills are then in turn, and Eva, we know, in the real world. There's so many things we can apply from sport, and whether you're a coach or a president or whoever you are, a player, we can apply that skill set into the real world to be a better person, to be a better mentor, to be the best version of yourself in your job. So I just want to talk about how influential sport is and the skill set you learn within your sport when you take that and then go out in the real world.
I think that we've heard it from all the panelists here already. But definitely, I think that being in the dressing room, especially when you're dealing with team sports, because you know there's a necessity in a team sport to work together, to collaborate. You know, it's especially with a sport like soccer that we love so much. You know, you go into a job like mine. I'm a chartered professional accountant by profession. But I deal with people every day. I deal with clients, I deal with my staff members, I deal with my immediate team, and those skills from sport are transferable into what you do in your everyday life. One of the, there's anecdotal remarks coming from all of us, and I love the family piece that we talk about because that's so important. But one of the things that I find that is really rewarding is seeing my own kids give back to the sport. And I'll take a little bit of credit for that because, I got them into sport. I didn't push them in. They loved sport from the very beginning. But it was, they playing their careers, youth soccer, youth rugby, whatever sport it was. And now they're all in their 30s and they're back in their local clubs or association, and they're giving back themselves. So we've instilled in them, that kind of attitude for them to give back to the sport in all kinds of different ways, whether it's coaching or whether it's administration. I have one son who's actually doing sponsorship for his local club because he's got a certain skill set in that area. So, there's all different kinds of ways that we can bring that learning and give back to the sport, whether it's at the professional level, whether it's your actual job or whether it's on a volunteer basis.
So many life lessons in the game, right? You think about it. Sport creates a hunger, right? It teaches you to compete, but compete at the right level. It also can be very humbling because it teaches you humility, because you're not always going to be the best. It teaches you how to interact with people, right? And you think about these are things that in life you just have to have, right? But it teaches you what it feels like to win and not to win. I don't like to say lose, not to win, but it does teach you both sides of that equation, And Steve's right, like to see your own family give back to sport, because it's great. It just creates a dynamic within the family that's unbelievable. My oldest son now is now coaching Timbits soccer for my grandson. And I didn't ask him to do it. He did it, and he grew up playing. Right, and so the giving back part is very important as well. I agree with Steve.
So I'm just recollecting on soccer and what it's done for me, and I've been fortunate to make a career out of it. But we talk about how to win, how to lose, and there was a story, and I can vividly remember it. I was in third grade, and my team was playing a game, and we lost, and I was so angry just as a young kid, and I left the field, and I went to, no one locked their doors back then, I assume, because I went into my dad's car and I just sat in there, and my dad spent an hour looking for me, and he couldn't find me, and I was in the car, and I remember crying, and I was just so angry that I couldn't make my team win. We lost. And it's funny because my dad says that's the moment he knew I was going to be successful, because I used that fear of losing, or that kind of anger, to drive myself to be better, to be a better soccer player, to be a better teammate, and to will myself to succeed. And it's so crazy because that little moment I can actually remember sitting in the car crying, because at a young age, I was probably 8 years old, you couldn't control your emotions. And it's amazing how our sport and sport in general can teach you these life lessons. And I always try to remember back to that. We're in a business where especially in soccer, you win and lose on the field, and what you need to do, and in my role as an executive, what can I do that can help my team win on the field, and that, you do lose, and you need to learn how to lose with humility, but you need to take the lessons from that, which again are life lessons, right? Because sometimes, we were talking about Richie Laria. He got cut from Orlando, and his career was almost derailed before it got started, and now he's on the Canadian national team. 1 year later, and I was telling Caroline, and you love him now, he's your favorite player, because it's a true story. This kid got cut. He was 3 years in Orlando, got cut. No one wanted him. No one picked him up in waivers. And a guy who works for Dave now, Costa, called me and said, hey, can you give him a chance? And I went and I spoke to our coach, and our coach is like, and I was like, just give him a chance. 7 weeks without a paycheck, trained with us. 7 weeks. Not many players would do that, right? Mm-hmm. And then we gave him a contract, and we're actually going to renegotiate a new contract with him now. He learned, maybe a little bit that I needed to do some extra, and he needed to go 7 weeks without a paycheck to show how much he loved this game and what he could do.
What a
Who does
valuable
that?
lesson.
Yeah.
You are literally put in a position. You're going to sink or swim. Yeah. And whichever way the outcome was going to go, he would have to figure it out. Yeah. And that happens out of sport, inside of sport. I'm a huge fan now. I was before hearing that story, and now definitely hearing. I was looking at my dad. I'm like, Dad, you listening to that?
Oh, I know.
It's great.
I love Richie too. And his wife had a baby, just had a baby, and he had no paycheck. And, you know, it was sink or swim, and he chose to swim, and he made it work. And he's going to have a fantastic career at the national team. I mean, he's a 1995, which means in 2026 he'll be 29 years old, the prime of his career. He's a good one.
It's been really big for me. I'm going to pick up on the sink or swim because the big thing for me over the course of especially the last 15 years, not only for myself, but even just observing individuals that have worked for me and tough moments that we've had, whether it's been the business side, the playing side, the coaching side. I mean, you run up against tough moments all the time. And this was a shift for me because I wasn't always like this, but I've become much more like this, which is I really tried to do everything I can to help people swim. Right? I mean, you have to create a competitive environment for them so that you can get the best out of them. But at the end of the day, you also have to say, have I done everything I can for them to swim? You know, and that's on you as the leader, as the coach, as the administrator. And it's hard to look at that because there are days where you look and say, you know, I didn't help. I actually made it difficult for them to swim, and that's on me. So, you know, and this is something out of sport that I took away. And again, it's back to coaches of how they responded in moments where if you were a key member of the team and you didn't perform on the day, you know, like a thing that resonates with me is people don't wake up to be, right? So something's going on, usually. Something's going on. Some people just don't perform on the day. That does happen. But there's a lot of factors in today's world, you know. There's a lot of noise going on. And I think where we can just help to reduce the noise, focus, build people up. At the end of the day, you want everyone to swim. You want people to be successful. So.
You and I are going to chat after this. We're going to put our heads together. We're going to do something great. All right, Bill, I have a question for you. Obviously, 2026 is a massive opportunity not only for Canada, North America in general, MLS. How important is it in terms of Major League Soccer, Toronto FC?
Oh, I think it's hugely important. I think, you know, we take great pride in the players on Toronto FC who are part of our national team program, and we really have, most of them are actually in the youth ranks right now. I think we have 3 on the senior team, but most are in the youth ranks, and it's just a source of pride. And you know, it's so crazy to say this, but you know, when I watched Canada beat the U.S. at BMO Field, I'm torn because I got Jonathan Osorio and Liam Frazier, Richie Laria out there. But I'm American. I was born in America, and I know guys on the U.S. team, and it's this weird feeling. And I went down to Orlando, and I watched when the U.S. won. And what's so crazy, again, going back to my 17-year-old, he was rooting for Canada. He's been here 5 years now, but he was rooting for Canada.
He gets to get the tattoo now.
Yeah, and it's this weird dynamic as I've been here 5 years now. But I think, you know, for our organization and me personally, like, we take such great pride that we can actually bring our players to another level, which is the Canadian national soccer team. And again, I think that the competition that we're putting these players in and the level of play is helping the country. And it's just something we hope we can continue to push forward and continue to build good young players. You know, I like to say 99.9% of the kids in our academy are Canadian, and it's my son and Greg Vanny's son, the 0.1%, who are now going to be residents, actually. But it's something we take great pride in. We really, really do. There is a bigger, you know, kind of global agenda in Canada than just Toronto FC, just Major League Soccer, and it actually is the Canadian national team program, which is never lost on me. So we work very closely, and I think, you know, Steve, you know, knows this in the past, and I remember when I first got here, TFC had a very antagonistic relationship with the national team program when Benito was the coach, and it just didn't feel right. And we've worked really, really hard to build bridges, right? And we have a fantastic relationship with John and his staff. In fact, they were just out with us a few weeks ago with his entire coaching staff, and they spent the week at BMO Training Ground getting to know our kids, training our kids for a week, which was great for our program. And so I think I say it's still what I'm seeing from kind of an outsider's perspective. it's the tip of the iceberg right now with Canada Soccer. I really feel that.
It's amazing.
It's a shift, like you've seen it, that's really interesting, like the numbers that you're talking about there. But it used to be where we're concerned because our players are leaving.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to
Now
other
it's
countries
fantastic.
because
Yeah.
they have dual nationality and they can do that. Now they're coming back.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, and part of it's the culture that's been built.
I mean, Lucas Cavallini, you know, that's a
Yeah.
big signing for MLS and
Yeah.
for Canada Soccer, that he came back to Vancouver, did fantastic in the Liga MX, and he's going to make a lot of money, and he earned it, you know, and it's really cool to see.
Yeah. No, so it's happening all over now. And that's, again, it's really, really encouraging for our national program and for our domestic leagues to see that happening.
The key thing is, and you know, and we need to continue to do this, but we need to create the highest level of competition available for young players coming up, and make sure that they get minutes. Because the way that players develop is best versus best, right? You have to play against players that are better than you to know whether you can get over that wall, right? You need to sink or swim, right? And so we have to create those opportunities for that. And it's important. Bill and I have talked about this. You know, we literally need to make sure that we, again, create lots of those minutes. I mean, you know, when you think about some of the way that we set up our league and we structured it, where with so many Canadians have to start the game, right? We had 80% of the players on the field last year were Canadian players. Like it's vitally important to make sure that we do that and continue to do that, because that's what develops young talent. And that it also is back to that, do I see the light at the end of the tunnel? Is it there for us, right? Because then you end up with players going elsewhere too, and that's fine as well, because they can create an even better career, whether it's down to the U.S. or overseas.
I showed you Alphonso Davies' locker room.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
And
Exactly.
I went to Bayern Munich for a tour recently, and I was so proud to see Alphonso Davies' jersey hanging there. I mean, what a story, that kid. Yeah. It's one of I think he's one of the best left-sided players in the world right now. He's 20 years old.
He's certainly fast enough.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't speak for everyone here, but I'm so excited from everything you guys contributed on this panel today. I'd love to just give these guys a round of applause, because this has been an unbelievable conversation. Our country, the sport of soccer, is in very good hands. I'm not worried at all. I'm inspired. I'm very, very excited to see where everything goes. And thank you guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Ontario Soccer. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, but that wraps up our panel. Thank you so, so much.
Good.